Today we will be explaining how to do the beam anchor construction sequence, found on page 128 of the B2P Bridge Builder Manual. This construction skill is crucial to the bridge construction process because anchors provide a means to terminate the main cables and transfer loads to the rest of the abutment. Certain safety procedures will need to be followed while performing this technique. You will need to use the appropriate PPE, which include hard hats, foot protection, hand and eye protection, and face masks. This is to prevent hazards related to moving the heavy reinforcing cage of the anchor and skin and eye irritation that could result from mixing concrete. The materials and tools needed for this particular construction skill are listed above and associated with making and marking out measurements, mixing concrete, and creating an anchor cage. Before beginning anchor construction, ensure that the working environment is clear of obstructions and that there is safe ingress and egress from the excavation, and be aware of the hazards associated with carrying materials over the construction site terrain. Make sure you're wearing all the required PPE to prevent injury if materials or tools are dropped. First, assemble the anchor reinforcing. To do this, refer to the rebar and assembly video and ensure that you follow the construction drawings when putting them together. Make sure to install the erection hooks onto the adjustable side reinforcing cage in the proper locations. Then, use the tape measure and spray paint to mark out where each cable and the center of the anchor must go in each anchor excavation relative to the center line, as shown in the picture on the screen. Second, unspool the cable. The cable will likely have been cut by students at the storage site and brought to site pre-cut to be unspooled. Unspool them carefully, with as many people as possible, since the cables are very heavy. Avoid kinks in the cable that will weaken it, and make sure not to lay the cable in sandy areas. Make sure to use heavy tie wire and duct tape to wrap the loose ends of the cable to prevent it from unraveling, and cut them very carefully to ensure the cables are of the desired length, and check the length of the cable for breakages and loose wires, since these may compromise the structural integrity of the bridge. Third, drape the cables. With the help of everyone on your team and community volunteers on site, drape the cables through the tower walkway tubes and across the river. Then, place the walkway cables in the fixed anchor excavation and the handrail cables over the tower saddles and into the excavation. The ends of each cable must drape off the tower and follow a straight path behind the tier into the excavation at the positions marked in spray paint. Then place the cables through the plastic tubing at the adjustable anchor.
Note that both anchors can be finished before the towers and walkway are done, as well as the cables are brought across the river. As long as the cables are cast into the fixed anchor, then the adjustable anchor can be placed with tubing and giving extra caution so that concrete does not get inside that tubing and block anything. And the cables can be directed around the tower saddle and walkway saddle until they're ready to be draped over.
Fourth, place the anchor reinforcing cage inside the anchor excavation on top of the main cables. However, be aware that the reinforcing cage is extremely heavy. First, create a plan for moving the steel cage and communicate it with everyone involved. Consider assigning a person who can communicate with both community members and volunteers to direct the crew as the cage is being moved. Once the reinforcing cage has been placed in the anchor excavation, roll the anchor cage to the correct angle so that it is parallel to the front face of the anchor. Make sure proper clear cover is achieved, using bricks or stones to prop the cage up to the correct angle and position. Then, check to ensure no parts of the cage have shifted out of place and make sure that the spray-painted guidelines on the cage line up with the center line and tower dimensions and adjust it as needed.
Sometimes, depending on the back slope, we'll build a masonry wall behind the anchor. This is not the back wall, but it's used to keep soil from coming into the anchor, as well as provide a plumb surface to build the anchor up against when sometimes the soil from that wall is starting to crumble or fall into that anchor. As well, you can see once the anchor cage is placed, it also needs to be tied down to something. Once it's propped up on the rocks, that is not sufficient. So one option is to pound rebar into the ground as well as into the side walls if the excavation is deep enough, and this is an option. And in the video here, you can see the masons are tying the rebar reinforcing bar cage to that rebar that's been pounded into the grounds in the masonry wall to keep it stable as we begin placing our anchor.
Then, place the cables through the plastic tubing at the adjustable anchor and wrap each cable around the cage, wrapping the cable under so that the dead end is on top of the cage. That way the clamp saddle will be facing upwards to the clamps that are going to be torqued. Then extend the tail towards the tower, ensuring again that the location of each cable is positioned and aligned behind its bearing location at the tower indicated with spray paint. Fifth, clamp the cables at the fixed anchor. The dead end or tail of the cable should sit on the top of the live end. Make sure to check that the cables are in the right place, match the locations indicated by spray paint, and have been wrapped around the cage in the right direction before torquing. If a mistake is made after the cables have been torqued, the clamps and cable will have to be removed because that portion of the cable will no longer be structurally sound to be clamped again. At the fixed anchor, apply and fully tighten the cable clamps as specified in Table 14-1 on page 194 of the Bridge Builder Manual, or until a 25% reduction in cross-section at the dead end of the cable. Lie the clamp saddle against the live end of the cable and lie the U-bolt of the clamp against the dead end of the cable. Sixth, place concrete at the fixed anchor. Use a string line from the anchor to the embedded saddle at the tower and to the cable guides on the walkway hump. This will model the proper angle needed for the cables from the anchor to the tower. Then place stones or bricks around the cables to achieve the proper angle and protect them from impact. Fill the fixed anchor excavation with a concrete of a 1-2-3 cement to sand to gravel ratio, making sure to follow the dimensions specified in the anchor details of the plans and to not drop the wet concrete mix more than 1 meter.
A good example of what not to do, pouring or placing concrete from too high, is shown here in the video with the wheelbarrow. A solution we came up with specifically on the Atike 2021 build was to use a piece of old tin roofing material to create a slide. This was both convenient for the community, hand mixing concrete, and being able to just place this directly onto the slide, as well as minimizing the distance the concrete was dropped.
Ensure the entire anchor is entirely submerged in concrete with adequate cover of the rebar, and use a 16mm bar or stick to rod the concrete. Lastly, prepare the adjustable anchor and place concrete. Repeat the same process of clamping the cables as mentioned before for the fixed anchor, but now on the adjustable anchor. Then cap the ends of the tubes on the anchor cage with rags, tape, use cement bags, or other materials to keep the interior of the tubes free from concrete, and make sure that you can later remove the material you use to plug the tubes.
One additional tip for getting concrete into the tubes of the adjustable side is to cut small holes on top of those tubes that we need to protect and make sure they don't fill when we're doing the anchor placement. However, after placing the anchor, it's good to go back, and in this case, the video, we're using small wooden stakes wrapped in cement bags in order to protect those holes that we can then use later on to push more fill into those tubes.
Then repeat step 6 of the fixed anchor on the adjustable anchor. It's also important to continuously quality control each step of the bridge building process. Before beginning the anchor construction, use the plumb bob and tape measure to verify that the excavation dimensions are correct and centered on the bridge center line, according to the construction drawings. Then ensure that there is no water seepage in the excavation. When filling the anchor, ensure that all concrete is placed within 1 hour of mixing. If too much time elapses between concrete batches, especially on warm or dry days, moisten the surface of the concrete before placing the next batch. If a construction joint is required, roughen the concrete surface, maintain enough clearance around the horizontal reinforcing so that aggregate can pass, and moisten the existing concrete surface before placing the new concrete. Then, wait at least 2 or 3 days before removing the forms or hoisting the cables.
Now that wraps up our information on anchor placement. Remember, more information can always be found in the Bridge Builder Manual, and remember to take care of the anchor in the days after placing it. In order to avoid fissures, cracks, you'll need to make sure the top of the anchor is moist using old cement bags or splashing water on top, depending on the climate and how much sun the anchor is getting.